Spring 1944. In the fields of southern England, strange shapes began to rise from the mist. They weren't aircraft or tanks, not real ones at least. Inflatable vehicles, made of canvas and rubber, gleamed faintly under the gray sky. From a distance they looked formidable, columns of tanks, convoys of trucks, entire airfields bustling with motion. Up close they were hollow ghosts. The operation had a name whispered only in select rooms: Fortitude South, part of a broader deception called Operation Bodyguard. The grand illusion meant to convince the German High Command that the Allied invasion of Europe would strike not at Normandy, but at Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France. The Royal Air Force, working with British intelligence and the U.S. Army's 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, known as the Ghost Army, began crafting an elaborate performance. Balloons became bombers, dummies became divisions, and sound trucks blared the rumble of engines across the countryside. To German reconnaissance aircraft flying overhead, the illusion was flawless. Beneath tarps lay inflatable Sherman tanks, painted and weathered to look battle-ready. Crews moved them at night, creating the illusion of repositioning. Wooden frames mimicked radar towers. Even fake runways were dusted with sand to simulate the burn marks of countless takeoffs. The RAF played its part with brilliance, scattering balloon decoys in strategic locations to simulate entire bomber groups. These weren't random tricks. Every detail was meticulously planned by intelligence officers and artists who understood both camouflage and theater. Maps were forged, radio transmissions fabricated, and weather forecasts subtly manipulated to match fictional operations. By mid-May 1944, an entire Phantom Army, the first U.S. Army Group, FUSAG, existed on paper, air, and canvas. The RAF's balloons, often tethered on long steel cables, floated high above the countryside, their shadows photographed by German reconnaissance planes. Each new set of images was carefully analyzed by Nazi intelligence, and each time the illusion deepened. German analysts were convinced the Allied invasion would come through Calais. Meanwhile, far to the west, in quiet coastal towns of Devon and Dorset, the real invasion force was already preparing to strike, hidden beneath the greatest illusion of the war. By May 1944, the skies over southern England were a stage for one of the most audacious deceptions of World War II. The RAF deployed dozens of special observation balloons, large canvas spheres, tethered with steel cables and rigged to mimic the silhouettes of B-17 flying fortresses and Lancaster bombers. From the air, these floating decoys were indistinguishable from real bombers. The balloons weren't stationary. Pilots and ground crews coordinated subtle movements to simulate flight patterns, creating the illusion of bombing runs and training sorties. Sound trucks below played recordings of engines revving, radios transmitted fabricated flight orders, and flares mimicked night landings. German reconnaissance planes, flying over Sussex, Kent, and Hampshire, photographed the balloons, believing they were spotting the buildup of a massive bomber force ready to strike Calais. Analysts in Berlin meticulously charted these movements, allocating resources to defend a phantom invasion that would never come. Each balloon was carefully crafted, painted with shadows and highlights, rigged with cloth flaps that fluttered like propellers, and weighted to appear airborne at realistic altitude. In some cases, small radio transmitters added to the illusion, emitting signals consistent with actual squadron communications. The deception extended beyond England's coastline. Inflatable tanks and artillery pieces were placed near airfields, while dummy amphibious vehicles lined roads near harbors. The RAF's balloons and these inflatable units together created a convincing narrative, a fully mobilized Allied force, ready to strike the Germans at their most vulnerable point. Every photograph taken by the Luftwaffe was carefully studied by British intelligence. Officers noted which decoys appeared most convincing and adjusted future deployments accordingly. The balloon operations were more than tricks. They were precision instruments in psychological warfare, designed to manipulate enemy perceptions and force strategic errors. By mid-June, German forces were fully convinced. Their command concentrated troops, aircraft, and anti-aircraft batteries near Pas-de-Calais, while the real Allied invasion, Operation Overlord, quietly prepared along the Normandy coast. As June 1944 approached, the Allies needed more than balloons. They required a complete illusion of an entire army. Operation Fortitude, the deception plan supporting D-Day, relied on creating a phantom army in southeastern England, led by the fictional General George S. Patton commanding the 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG. British intelligence worked closely with the RAF Balloon Command to ensure the balloons were part of a larger, believable narrative. Fake radio traffic, known as special wireless traffic, simulated conversations between divisions, while double agents relayed deliberate misinformation to German intelligence. Every balloon flight, dummy tank, and airfield dummy fed into the illusion of a massive force preparing to strike Calais. The decoys were strategically positioned along roads and fields, creating the visual impression of troop movements. Inflatable tanks, trucks, and artillery complemented the airborne balloons, while motorized flares simulated convoy headlights at night. From the air, and even from satellite observation of the era's reconnaissance planes, the landscape seemed alive with Allied preparations. RAF photographic units documented each balloon array, ensuring that Luftwaffe reconnaissance would see consistent patterns over weeks. The Germans, analyzing these photos, reported the presence of entire armored divisions and bomber groups poised for an invasion, entirely unaware that most were illusions. The intelligence value was immense. By convincing the German High Command that Calais was the primary invasion target, Operation Fortitude diverted critical enemy troops away from Normandy. When the real landings began on June 6, 1944, the Germans were slow to react, holding their best divisions far from the actual landing beaches. The combination of balloons, inflatable equipment, fake radio traffic, and double-agent reports exemplified how physical decoys could be amplified by psychological manipulation. The Germans were not just deceived, they were strategically outmaneuvered without firing a single shot. Not all of Operation Fortitude's success came from ground-based deception. The RAF Balloon Command played a critical role in turning the skies over southern England into a convincing battlefield stage. These balloons, known as special tactical balloons, were tethered to mimic the silhouettes of troop columns, artillery units, and even radar-emitting equipment. Launched at dawn and dusk to catch German reconnaissance flights, each balloon was carefully positioned using detailed aerial maps and wind forecasts. Some were equipped with metallic strips and lightweight panels to reflect sunlight and cast shadows that resembled armored vehicles from above. Others had small radio transmitters that simulated the noise of mechanized units moving through open field. The scale was staggering. By May 1944, hundreds of balloons were floating over the southeastern counties of England. From the Luftwaffe's perspective, these appeared as the vanguard of a massive Allied buildup, signaling preparations for an invasion that would never come at Calais. The German intelligence reports noted columns of armored formations and artillery batteries, moving in patterns consistent with invasion rehearsals. RAF crews meticulously monitored each balloon's flight, adjusting tethers, angles, and positions to maintain realism. Even the weather was used to their advantage. Low clouds and mist could hide balloon strings, while early morning sunlight enhanced the shadows on the ground. Every launch was an exercise in aerial choreography, blending science, artistry, and military strategy. This airborne deception not only amplified the credibility of ground decoys, but also forced the Germans to commit resources defensively to regions that were, in reality, empty. The success of the balloon operations demonstrated that visual illusion, combined with intelligence planning, could manipulate an enemy's perception of strength, readiness, and intent, shaping their decisions long before any actual combat began. While the skies filled with decoy balloons, the ground beneath them turned into a meticulously crafted stage set. The British called it Operation Fortitude South, a vast deception campaign designed to convince the Germans that the Allied invasion of Europe would strike at Pas-de-Calais instead of Normandy. And at the heart of this illusion stood a phantom army, the first U.S. Army Group, FUSAG, commanded, at least on paper, by the charismatic General George S. Patton. In the rolling farmlands of Kent and Sussex, teams of camouflage engineers, film technicians, and Royal Engineers began constructing entire divisions that didn't exist. Inflatable Sherman tanks lined country roads. Plywood Spitfires and papier-mâché landing craft waited near coastal estuaries. Even fake tire tracks and campfires were created to sell the illusion to German aerial reconnaissance. At a glance, the English countryside appeared to be overflowing with men and material. Each detail was grounded in research. A single dummy landing craft, for instance, required over 200 man-hours to build, complete with tarred canvas, rope rigging, and reflective surfaces that fooled infrared sensors. Wooden jeeps were parked under camouflage nets, with shadows painted to match the sunlight. And to complete the effect, military radio operators transmitted constant chatter about logistics, troop movements, and upcoming operations, all directed to a network of false headquarters. The deception was so convincing that the Luftwaffe photographed the same tank columns multiple times, reporting them as fresh reinforcements. Intercepted German communications later revealed that Hitler himself was certain Calais was the real invasion point. Even weeks after D-Day, he refused to release divisions stationed there, believing Normandy was a diversion. Behind this illusion was a small army of artists, carpenters, set designers, and intelligence officers who understood a simple truth. In modern warfare, what the enemy believes can be more decisive than what he actually sees. Operation Fortitude proved that illusion, when executed with precision, could shape the battlefield long before a single shot was fired. While fake tanks and plywood aircraft fooled German scouts on the ground, an equally clever illusion took to the skies: the balloon squadrons of Operation Glimmer and Taxable. These were not the barrage balloons that shielded London from bombers. These were decoy fleets, drifting in perfect formation, designed to imitate the radar signature of invasion convoys crossing the English Channel. In the early hours of June 6, 1944, as Allied ships silently advanced toward Normandy, a handful of Royal Air Force units launched thousands of window strips, small pieces of aluminum foil, and coordinated radar-reflective balloons from modified aircraft. From the perspective of German radar operators along the coast, these ghostly echoes looked exactly like hundreds of landing craft heading toward Pas-de-Calais and Boulogne-sur-Mer. Pilots of RAF No. 218 Squadron and No. 617 Squadron, flying at dangerously low altitudes over the Channel, maintained strict timing and spacing, ensuring the fake invasion convoy appeared to be moving at realistic speed, roughly 7 knots, matching the actual Allied fleet en route to Normandy. Each pilot risked not only flak fire but also mid-air collision with the drifting balloons that formed the heart of the deception. Supporting these operations were special radar jamming units stationed in Dover and Folkestone, broadcasting phantom signals that simulated ship-to-ship communication. To German listening posts, the fleet seemed alive, a coordinated naval force preparing to strike. By dawn, the deception had succeeded. German High Command ordered Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights toward the false invasion zone, diverting aircraft that might have spotted the real Allied fleet heading toward Normandy. For nearly 6 crucial hours, the Nazis' radar screens showed a massive but completely imaginary attack force. Historians later called these balloon operations the invisible vanguard of D-Day, a combination of physics, timing, and pure audacity. Never before had an air force used the sky itself as a stage for illusion. The balloons didn't drop bombs or fire bullets, but they achieved what every general dreamed of. They controlled what the enemy thought was real. In the tense hours before dawn on June 6, 1944, 2 of the most audacious deception missions in modern warfare took shape over the English Channel: Operation Glimmer and Operation Taxable. Their purpose was simple but vital: to convince the Germans that the Allied invasion would strike anywhere but Normandy. These were not bombing runs or reconnaissance flight. Instead, they were carefully orchestrated illusions. RAF squadrons took off from southern England under strict radio silence, their bomb bays filled not with explosives, but with bundles of thin aluminum strips designed to reflect radar. Dropped in specific intervals, these strips created the electronic illusion of massive fleets moving slowly across the channel. Operation Glimmer focused near Boulogne, while Operation Taxable targeted Le Havre. Flying at altitudes between 5,000 and 8,000 feet, the RAF crews timed their runs to make the ghost convoys appear as if they were steaming steadily toward the French coast. To enhance the effect, radar-reflective balloons and false radio traffic were deployed, further reinforcing the illusion of two full-scale invasion forces approaching different beaches. At the same time, Operation Fortitude South, the Grand Deception campaign, had already convinced German intelligence that the real invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais. The fake balloon fleets and radar ghosts of Glimmer and Taxable were the final stroke, visual proof for the Germans that their assumptions were correct. The results were remarkable. German coastal defenses near Boulogne and Le Havre went on full alert, with searchlights sweeping the sea and artillery batteries standing ready. Commanders hesitated to move reinforcements toward Normandy, convinced that what they saw on their radar screens represented the main Allied assault. Meanwhile, the actual invasion fleet, carrying over 150,000 soldiers, moved undetected toward the beaches of Normandy. By the time the deception was uncovered, it was far too late. The fake fleets of Glimmer and Taxable had already fulfilled their mission, to buy time, create confusion, and keep the German war machine guessing. It was one of the few moments in military history when paper, foil, and hot air achieved what tanks and bombers could not: total strategic surprise. In the months leading up to D-Day, southern England became home to one of the strangest military forces in history, a vast army of air-filled ghosts. Spread across meadows and airfields were hundreds of inflatable tanks, trucks, artillery pieces, and even aircraft, all made from rubberized canvas and paint. This was the centerpiece of Operation Fortitude South, the grand deception designed to convince the Germans that the Allies would invade at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. From a distance, these fake armies looked completely real. Photographs from reconnaissance planes showed what appeared to be entire divisions massing for invasion, rows of Sherman tanks, neatly parked supply convoys, and tents stretching to the horizon. On the ground, special effects crews from the film industry and engineers from the British Army's camouflage unit worked together to ensure every detail was convincing. The project was coordinated by the British Deception Command, working with the U.S. First Army Group, FUSAG, a fictional unit supposedly led by the famous General George S. Patton, who had been temporarily sidelined after an incident in Sicily. His reputation for aggressive, fast-moving warfare made him the perfect figurehead for this illusion. German intelligence believed every move he made, and that belief became the foundation of the deception. Inflatable vehicles were only part of the show. Engineers created fake radio networks, transmitting endless coded chatter to simulate the logistics of a real invasion force: fuel deliveries, ammunition orders, and troop coordination. At night, teams moved around dummy landing craft, constructed from wood and canvas, to make it appear as though entire fleets were preparing to launch from Kent toward Calais. The attention to detail was astonishing. Tracks were pressed into the ground to mimic tank movement. Campfires burned at night to suggest active troop. Even dummy anti-aircraft positions were set up to defend against non-existent air raid. And above it all, weather balloons with radar reflectors helped create the illusion of dense military activity when observed by German radar stations across the Channel. German reconnaissance flights photographed the scene and dutifully reported massive Allied buildups in southeastern England. Meanwhile, Normandy remained largely ignored. Hitler and his generals were so convinced by the illusion that, even after the real invasion began on June 6, 1944, they continued to believe it was just a diversion, that Patton's army in Kent would soon cross the Channel for the real attack. Operation Fortitude's balloon army had done its job flawlessly. Without a single shot fired, it held back entire panzer divisions, bought the Allies critical time to secure Normandy, and became one of the most successful deceptions in military history. The impact of Operation Fortitude extended far beyond balloons and inflatable tanks. The Allies understood that war is as much about perception as reality, and Fortitude was designed to manipulate the German mind. Intelligence officers, including Colonel John Bevan of the British London Controlling Section, meticulously planned every detail so that each false signal reinforced the illusion of an imminent invasion at Pas-de-Calais. German commanders were constantly fed a carefully curated stream of misinformation. Double agents like Garbo, Juan Pujol Garcia, transmitted exaggerated troop numbers, false supply schedules, and invented unit movements. Reports described armored divisions amassing in Kent, airfields busy with transport aircraft, and naval convoys poised for embarkation. The Germans believed what they saw and heard, because each fake element, inflatable tanks, radio chatter, dummy landing craft, was backed by evidence. The psychological effect was profound. Hitler and his generals refused to redeploy units to Normandy, convinced that the real attack would come weeks later. Entire panzer divisions remained near Pas-de-Calais, while the Allies secured their beachheads with relatively limited resistance. German high command debated the validity of reports, but the consistency of Fortitude's deception made doubt impossible. Even when the D-Day landings began on June 6, 1944, German forces hesitated, unsure if the Normandy invasion was a diversion. The Allies' mastery of psychological manipulation saved thousands of lives and sped the liberation of Western Europe. Operation Fortitude proved that intelligence, cunning, and illusion could decisively shape the battlefield, turning perception into a weapon as lethal as any artillery shell. Operation Fortitude left a profound mark on military strategy and intelligence operation. The success of inflatable tanks, fake radio transmissions, and double agents demonstrated that warfare was no longer purely about firepower. It was about control of perception and manipulation of the enemy's decision-making. Military planners studied the operation for decades, incorporating its principles into modern psychological operations, PSYOP, and information warfare. The Allies' meticulous planning showed that every detail matters, from the shadows cast by dummy vehicles to the cadence of radio chatter that mimicked troop movements. Officers like Colonel John Bevan and agents such as Garbo became unsung architects of a new battlefield, where misinformation could be more decisive than bombs. Fortitude also underscored the importance of coordination between intelligence, engineering, and media specialists, foreshadowing the interdisciplinary nature of contemporary military campaigns. In Europe, Fortitude's effects persisted beyond D-Day. German troops hesitated to act, resources were misallocated, and high command struggled to interpret the true threat. This psychological paralysis exemplified the power of deception when executed with precision. The principles pioneered during Fortitude are now embedded in military academies worldwide, shaping how armed forces approach deception, reconnaissance, and electronic warfare. Ultimately, Operation Fortitude proved that the mind of the enemy can be as vulnerable as their front lines. Inflatable tanks and fake radio messages weren't mere tricks, they were instruments of strategy, proving that creativity, patience, and intelligence can alter the course of history without a single shot fired. Its legacy continues to inform both military tactics and the broader understanding of psychological influence in conflict.